When I went blind the first time, I thought I would never survive that. And I had a wonderful life. I was able to have a life, like have fun, have it all, even when I couldn't see. And so I look at it, I'm very grateful every day that I could see. I look every day at things to see what I haven't seen in a while, just so it can remind me in my mind of that appreciation for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But if I went blind again, I'm not scared. Like, can I do this? I've done it before. Yes, I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't, throw a party. But on the flip side of it, I know that I could have a wonderful life.
Beth Pizzarello, welcome to the See-Through podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for taking the time to come and talk to me.
I look forward to having this conversation.
Yeah. We have a lot in common. We never met, but we share the same eye condition, retinitis pigmentosa. And if you're a listener to this podcast and you've heard those two words said a lot, RP, it's like just gets said over and over again. But what's cool about your story is you have written a book. You have a memoir called Eclipsed. And in that book, it shares a lot of wisdom because you've had quite a journey in terms of your vision loss and how it's impacted your life and key moments that have changed. You've even had a procedure that brought back some of your vision at one point in time. So there's a lot to cover in this episode. So I just want to get everyone excited about what's to come. But I think first things first, let's just get an introduction from you. And can you tell everyone who you are and why you're here?
My name is Beth Pizzarello, and I'm an author now. Changed my job, sort of to say. And I'm here to help people who are losing their vision to learn how to adjust as far as the emotional side of it. Because in my travels with even my journey, I found out that I was more than my eyes. And other people are losing other senses, and you really are more than that. And if you are held hostage by that, you can't have a great life that you are deserving of. So that's my goal. That's what I do.
Well, that's a good goal. It's a good way to be. And not that I like to ask this question, but how old are you? Just so the listeners can kind of understand, because I interview people of all different ages on this podcast, and I think it's kind of good to know in terms of timeline of vision loss.
I know that I look like 25, but you don't need to card me. But I was seriously 63, and I'm living my best life right now. So no
great.
regrets. It's better than I ever thought it would be.
Well, you got the cool shades on, looking young. Yeah.
It's funny. I use these glasses when people are interviewing me because this eye is a wandering eye because it doesn't see. It just lives its own life. So it's sometimes when I'm talking to people, it's like watching the bouncing ball where the eye's going right, left, maybe circling. And I could see people's heads like moving with the eye. So I find it less distracting to just keep my shades on so that we don't have to have that distraction there.
Yeah.
Just want to let you know, it's not because I'm cool like a rock star, okay? It's because I want to be. I don't want anybody to be distracted.
Well, yeah, sunglasses are kind of part of that like stereotypical, blind trope. Like if you're blind, you have to wear sunglasses. Do you feel? What's your thoughts on that stereotype?
I feel that way, but I have. With my vision, I'm very, very light sensitive. So where people don't get it is like when I wear my sunglasses when we're having dinner out at night, or I'm wearing my sunglasses like at an event that might have some sort of a strobe light. So people look at me like, what's with you? At one point, it used to bother me. And then I figured out at the end of the day, when I leave this moment, you're not going to think twice about me. So what does it matter? I leave my glasses on and carry it that way. I've met other blind people that talked about the same thing. Even with the cane, people say, oh, you can see this or that, but you use a cane. I think that we, for blind people or people going through this situation, I think the one thing I've learned is do not be embarrassed about what you need and what somebody doesn't understand. I don't think that most people know that blindness is all different types. I've met all different variations of what was legally blind. And I learned from there that it would be a really big shame if you get run over by a car because you're too afraid to extend your cane. And I think that for me, once I got the fact that and accepted within my heart that blindness was not going to define me and what anybody else thought, that was okay because I was not out there to do anything else but to have a life like anybody else. Now, I do say when people ask me questions, I don't feel so embarrassed that I can't answer them. I explain to them about the the different degrees of blindness, and with me, what my situation is. Because, people don't know about the 20%, the 2,200. I mean, for me, I had one whole eye that was blind. I had another eye that was less than 20%, couldn't see 250 with corrective glasses, which means you couldn't really use any glasses. They did not help you. But that's the way they define this. So I had a bunch of things going on. So I tell people, and I've met a lot of young people who are losing their sight, don't be afraid to use your devices. Don't be afraid to answer people so people understand, because a lot of people don't get it. I said, and you don't have to be brave. Like people will look at me and say, oh, you're so brave. I'm not brave. You don't have to be, and this is what I've learned. You don't have to be brave to face your blindness or face what is preventing you right now, your obstacle. And I know you have to dig really deep to do it. And sometimes in life you have to. But in order to get forward in life, you can't go forward until you acknowledge where you are. And that's what I tell young people. You got to be real with yourself. And when you're real with yourself and you start to realize that you're more than your eyes, when I interview myself, I don't say, I'm going blind. My name is Beth Pizzarello. No, I say I'm Beth Pizzarello, author of a book, writing about my vision loss and my returning vision and hoping to inspire people to live every day fully. And I think that's the biggest corollary to my story. And that is bad things happen to good people, okay? But once you get beyond, and you have to, I was depressed for 5 years when they told me I was going blind. I decided I was going to do nothing. But you know what? The world never stopped for me. People were going on with their lives. And there was only one person sitting in that chair, and that was me. I had to make a decision. Did I want to join in or did I want to just sit in the chair? And not to cut you off or anything, but I think the biggest story I ever heard that impacted me the most when I was at the lighthouse, they were teaching us how to cross the street. Couldn't see a car. I had a flashback of my mother when I was a kid saying to me, look both ways and don't cross unless you see, make sure there's no cars coming because you can get run over. Well, geez, I'm blind. Forget that looking both ways. It wasn't doing anything for me. And I was so scared, and I learned how to listen for traffic patterns. And I was really good when I learned how to do this skill to cross streets. I was scared out of my mind in the class. And I remember sharing this with a gentleman who'd been in the lighthouse forever. And he said, well, let me ask you this. Has your instructor ever been run over? I said, no. He says, because she's been blind her whole life. And he said, let me give you advice. You have to make a choice. Do you want to proceed. He goes, why are you at the lighthouse? I said, to get my independence, my life back. And he said, let me ask you this. To get your independence, you need to cross the street or you live a right-hand life. You want to live a safe life, right? Is that what you're telling me? You're so scared? You're going to live a safe life? And I said, well, yeah, that's what I want. He goes, okay, I'm going to tell you how to do that. You want to live a right-hand turn life. And I said, what's that? He said, all you want to do is walk to the end of the block and make a right-hand turn and keep making that right-hand turn until you get home. You always keep moving, but going nowhere. And he said to me, I want to tell you the biggest thing I can ever share with you. In order for you to get your life going, you need to cross the street. And that's in many respects. And, that was the most powerful thing I ever heard. Because blindness is frightening. At times you wonder, how are you going to cross that street? But you know what? If you want your life bad enough, you're not recreating the wheel. Somebody else has already done that for you. All you need to do is be brave enough to jump on board and do the things that are going to give you that freedom. And no, it's not going to be the same when, I had made a decision. I'm never going to be happy unless I have my vision. Well, that's never is a pretty long time. And the irony to my story is I found my life and my happiness with changes in my thought at first because I was not eligible to go to the lighthouse, but I learned to do things for myself. Then when I got to the lighthouse, they enhanced the skills. But the thing of it is, I realized that you just have to keep going forward. You have to keep trying because the world is going to keep going. And do the best you can with that. And that's what I did. And that was life-changing. And yeah, I did some crazy things when I was going blind. I know I went to a black tie event and I was brailing the face of a lobster because they told me it was a tail and I was trying to line up to see what the food was. Well, I thought the best thing I could do is laugh about it and then say, well, at least I had the water glass to wash my hands off and put it in my napkin. But you have to at least gain your humor. You don't have to be the bravest. Just look what you are dealing with and find avenues that are available for you. The first thing I learned was counting. I didn't have to go to the lighthouse to count, but when I fell a few times in front of my house, I kind of got the gist of how many to count it. I didn't do that again. Same thing when I went out and I did not have the cane. I wrote my book about my tap dancing foot. I used my foot to feel for steps, and I used my pocketbook because it had a long handle to figure out depth. Well, I got it where nobody really questioned me. I looked a little odd, but I didn't care. I did what I had to do. The bottom line is, if I didn't make that choice so many years ago, I would have been totally miserable sitting in that chair for 25 years. This day, with getting my vision back, was destined to happen as far as technology is concerned. So I would have been miserable basically for nothing. And that's what I also is the corollary to my story. You're talking to Rip Van Winkle, the modern day Rip Van Winkle. I went blind when the little guy was running across the screen for AOL. I got my sight back when people had smartphones with these little things called icons. And that is the best thing I can share with your audience is that never lose hope. Never lose hope today.
Okay. Yeah, you have a lot of experience, with blindness, and you've kind of navigated blindness even before I was born, So yeah, I think you've kind of seen the community change.
For sure.
A real popular phrase is called blindness is a spectrum, and you have a line that you talk about where you say going blind isn't the same as, being blind. And you're speaking of from literal experience on that.
That is correct.
What's the difference between going blind and being blind? Because I would consider, like, for example, I could describe myself as going blind. I have RP, I'm losing vision.
Right.
Whereas you yourself, you describe yourself as you're being blind. So what's the difference between those two?
Going blind is the journey, and the journey even in acceptance as my vision, as your vision, anyone who's listening to this podcast, as your vision decreases. So when I was living blind, that was at that point where I reached a point where I was in acceptance of this, what is going on, making changes and decisions I was making to help this along, and living is getting more accustomed and adjusting your life to what your situation is, your circumstance is. Going, was a day to day. I really didn't quite figure it out, hadn't figured out nothing. So going was like the big journey with the potholes and all that stuff. So I think the living is when you figure out things that are going to work for you. That's the difference.
Okay, so you're saying going blind is kind of like the part of your life where you're diagnosed. Like for me, I know I have retinitis pigmentosa, but I'm not, in the legally blind category yet. I'm experiencing symptoms, but I'm still not legally blind. So it kind of makes it kind of complex because I'm like, well, there's times where I, will miss a step. There's times where I'll miss a handshake. There's times where I'll knock over somebody's drink. There's times where I'll, bump into somebody I didn't see. But there's also times where I don't have any issues. And and sometimes it's like almost like I forget I have this, eye condition. I have basically what I'm saying is I have good days and bad days. And so sometimes it's difficult to navigate. It's like, all right, should I use my white cane?
Right.
Even though my frequency of mistakes or mishaps is small, that type of thing. And then also it's like, do I adapt my career? Like I work as a video editor, like that's how I make money. So I'm kind of dependent on central vision. I can lose my peripheral, but I need my central so I can see the screen, so I can edit, that type of thing. But do I keep editing? Do I, these are all kind of things like that kind of pop into my mind as someone who knows they have this eye condition. Is like, all right, how far can I take my current lifestyle with my eye condition? Or am I eventually just going to hit a brick wall and have to restart and rebuild everything? Or do I adapt now and make changes now for it? I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to kind of retroactively or not retroactively, but kind of predict the future and kind of adapt to what I imagine my life's going to be like.
Right.
But it's just kind of complex, and it's hard for others around me to understand. Like I feel like my wife, she's very supportive of me, but I don't quite think you understand it unless you're living it as well.
This is for sure.
And same with family members, friends, you name it. So it's like that going blind part versus living blind, using the cane daily, using the accessible technology, identifying yourself as blind. And what advice would you give to someone in the going blind category? Do they need to over prepare, or do they just need to just try to be happy and live a full life, or is it a mix of both? What kind of advice would you give?
I think it's a mix of both. Like when I was at your stage in my blindness, one regret I had is that I didn't explore the opportunities at that particular point in my vision loss. Because if I had, I probably would have pivoted into something else and maybe even related. Because right now I wrote a book, I'm talking. That's not much different than what I was doing I taught college for a while, and I did a couple of things, other things in business, but that did not for me, work out in the long term just because I knew realistically, for example, I was never going to be an accountant at that point. I mean, that's the bottom line to that, but I still could talk. So when I was doing like human resources and training, I could still do that. And I think that with technology, especially in your situation, I would explore what you can do. And plus, I have found in my travels, and I don't know if that would be the same as what you do, is that sometimes you find younger people that can kind of fill in the spot because you have already seen hundreds of videos. So you're like a producer, director on a video, on a movie. You know when somebody says, "Oh, we got to," you say, "Hey, do we have a lot of white space?" Yeah, we do. We don't have a lot of scenery. Okay, well, we're gonna have to look at that shot again. I think that there's some things that other people can help you with just based on your knowledge. You know what I mean? If you've done something for years and years and years and you enjoy it, I would say to find out what exactly you can do with that. With me, when I found out I was going blind, it paralyzed me. Just hearing I was going blind. I was blind way before I was blind, truly blind with my vision and a blind opportunity. So I say, like, with the computer age as such, see what you can do with that as long as you love what you're doing, or pivot to what you're doing to still do the same type of thing, but maybe a little differently. Because I know what it's like when you don't want to just give up everything. I tell people, don't just give up everything because you're going blind, but do explore what you can do, and especially if you love it. Because a lot of times I think when we're losing our vision, we don't look beyond the moment we're living in. When you're going blind, you have to think outside the box sometimes, you know? And so live your best life for sure. Laugh for sure, but don't discount things that you can do and say, well, maybe I won't be able to do that because blindness is such a tricky thing. Like with me, I still had some vision in that one eye, and then I got that viral infection, and it put the scarring tissue on the two eyes. Well, nobody, I mean, in my RP journey, they never told me that some other diseases could come into play and blind me before the RP. That wasn't in the conversation. So that's why I say to younger people, live your best life, but don't discount what you're doing. Don't discount it. I mean, when I have to give up something, truly give it up, give it up, give it up, I have gone to every avenue. But I've also, as I'm older and as I was getting older, learned that pivoting really, really is the way to go, especially with technology. I think that your mind is such that you already know how your screen is going to look. You've done it, and you're very creative. That you won't lose that. So that's what I say to younger people: don't lose your
Mm-hmm.
dream. Just maybe pivot it differently to what your vision is about.
I love that. Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. And when it comes to your diagnosis, can you walk me and the listeners through, how you figured out you were going blind and the timeline and when you did, and then how your vision changed over the years?
When I was a senior, getting 2 weeks before graduating college, with two degrees that were sight related, I was getting one in biology and one in business, minor in economics. So I was all ready. I had all these plans. I went to a party and I walked into a desk full of drinks. Totally put them all on the floor. Never saw the desk. So I was thinking that it was eye strain because I was studying so hard and whatnot. So I went to the eye doctor to see if I can get a few drops to fix the eye strain problem. And I went to a major University Hospital in Philadelphia at that time. And they did some tests. And I sat with the doctor and I said, "Can I get some drops? Do you have drops for me?" And he goes, "Did anybody tell you that you're losing vision?" I said, "No. I had knocked over some drinks." I said, "But no, I didn't really notice that." He said, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you that you're going blind from a thing called retinitis pigmentosa." And immediately I was thinking, like, no, he's not talking to me. He can't be talking to me. And I said, "Well, when is this supposed to happen?" And he said, "Well, we if it progresses to what we see, you're going to be blind by 40." He wasn't far off. I was blind by 38. But what blinded me wasn't the retinitis pigmentosa totally. I had one eye, this eye that was non-viable and was blinded by the RP, but this eye was not. And I was like, what? What? But it ended up at 38, I did from a viral infection. Who thought that? I was waiting for retinitis pigmentosa to kind of finish it. It didn't. It was a virus. So that's another thing I will share with your listeners. You can't always think that you're going to go maybe blind or whatever by whatever is right now you're dealing with. I never expected a viral infection to hit my eyes at all. And what it did was it caused because I never felt it. It caused two masses of scarring tissue to go over the lenses of my eyes. So if you have a cataract surgery, you have a groove that they put the new lens in. My total grooves on both eyes, even the blind eye, gone. Can't do anything with it. And they told me that I would be blind until somebody could figure out what to do for people who didn't have the groove. So I went blind slowly. I went first where I only had center where all my periphery closed in. Then there reached a point where I started losing clarity, but also color for me. One point, yellow disappeared. Blue and purple looked about the same. Red and orange looked the same. And then they took on only, and I guess this was after the virus, they took on the colors of black, a grayish, a white. Behind, if you have wax paper, if you put wax paper up, that's exactly what I saw. That was it. So my blindness was slow. It was like pulling a bandage off an arm. It was slow. I mean, every day I would try to do these like little tests, how much more I lost or whatever, which was really kind of crazy. It really made me crazy because my vision wasn't continuously lost. I would go into plateaus where I had no vision loss for a long time, where I just thought, well, gee, it's all over. And then all of a sudden I would have another episode where I would have vision loss gone, where there's nothing that you could do about it. So that's how my vision went. And then ultimately, I got to the point where I just couldn't see anything. It was just, like I say, just behind wax paper, black, gray, white kind of colors all moving around. I did go to Lighthouse for the Blind when I was first deemed legally blind. And
How old were you when you were told you were legally blind?
when I was told I was going legally, when I was legally blind or when I was told? When I was told I was in college in my 20s, 22,
Okay.
23. When I went to the Lighthouse, I was 1990, I was closing in on almost 40. So 30
Okay.
something, the late 30s, 39, 40.
Okay.
And then that's where the Lighthouse really changed my life. I can't sing enough praises about the Lighthouse for the Blind.
And what is the Lighthouse for those who don't know?
Lighthouse of the Blind is a place where you can go and you get training and education about living with sight loss, being legally blind. And the most empowering thing I learned first was how to handle money, because they used to say money is power. So when they'd say take out your wallets, and you had ones where you would keep flat, five you fold in half, 10 you fold again another half, so that would be like a quarter. Anything bigger than a $10 bill you make into a triangle. You don't want a lot of triangles, because if you lose one triangle, that's worth a lot of those other bills. You don't want to do that. So they taught us how to fold money, how to be, when you're when you're getting cashed out and people give you change, you ask them, and what are you giving me? And ask them to give you your denomination separately. So what? Then you just put them in your wallet. You don't need help for anybody else to help you with cash. And I think that was a very, very freeing moment. Very freeing.
Okay.
And what they do is they just train you. They train you on how to live, even as a blind person. That's where you get your cane. You get cane training. They teach you how to do tapping the cane properly so you don't fall, because it gets stuck in some grooves of sidewalks. They teach you a lot of different things. Some kids go there for school because there are blind children, but you have to qualify and be legally blind. They even do the GEDs for kids, and then as you're an adult, they do the training. You learn how to cross the street on your own. You learn, like I say, money, how to use the cane, and also they talk about the ADA. And that's one of the things I was really grateful for too. A lot of times when I was going blind, I would say, "Can you help me?" And sometimes people, I could tell they were reluctant. Maybe they would breathe heavy or something. And I'd always say, "I'm sorry, I'm disturbing you." But you know what? The ADA says you're not disturbing them. This is called law. And you should not be embarrassed or hold back from asking somebody where to go. Where is your escalator? Where is your elevator? Where are your women's apparel? You can ask people, because a lot of people, their response is over there. And over where? And you have to be able to be brave enough to ask that, because a lot of times people don't automatically tune into it. But it is your right under the law for people to help you. And I've done that. Most people are wonderful. And, now the ADA is so there, people are so used to it. They usually don't, I never have to say, well, the ADA by law, you're supposed to help me do something here, at least give me directions. But the point of it is, I'm not embarrassed to ask people for help. I used to be, not anymore. And I also say to young people, if you have the cane, bring it with you. Even if you say, I think I'll be all right. Sometimes you're not going to be. And it's just good to have that there. And I will say, I get sometimes a lot more help with the extension of the cane than I do just asking somebody or explaining, oh, I have a sight problem. I mix into the crowd. The cane is like kind of, like screaming, hello, this is your reminder, re-verifying, I can't see. And so I would never be embarrassed to bring your cane. Never. Because you can always keep it folded up. You don't have to always, extend it, but it's always good to have it with you, because at those times, and I've had them, those unexpected times, I was really grateful I had the cane with me. And that's something else I can say about that.
Yeah, I like the Lighthouse for the Blind. I had orientation and mobility here in Brooklyn through the Lighthouse here. And I've also helped, or not helped, but I was a guest speaker at a Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco, talking about podcasting and
Right.
So those are my two experiences with the Lighthouse, where and then they also put on a comedy show every year
wow.
here in New York, where
Right.
they have some blind comedians in doing stand up, but they also have some other, just big names in comedy pop in and do sets, and
Right.
it's just really fun. But it very cool, very helpful,
For sure.
and I can't speak more highly of them. I think it's amazing that these private companies exist. Because
Yes.
if I wanted to be honest with you, if it weren't for the private industries helping the blind people, I don't think the government would be of much assistance.
No. And these days, no. That's why,
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the people who donate to Lighthouse and keep
Yeah.
that lighthouse going. Because at the end of the day, many blind people can do many, many jobs. If you get some training, get the transportation, do some other things, you're not defined by your blindness. Good grief. And I think that the lighthouse gets you to realize that you're more than that.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful to them. I was so scared. I had nobody to share. Like you say, blindness is a very lonely journey. And for me, it got really lonely when what I saw, whether my eyes were open or closed, was the same thing, nothing. And nobody can understand that. I don't think anybody could understand
Hmm.
going blind. You know, when you don't have the cane, I mean, I remember I used to I'd fall over some weird things and people would just look at me like, oh, didn't you see that? No. I fell over one time, the Target ball, the Target store. I fell over
Oh
the red
yeah.
ball. I never saw it. Went
Those
crashing
balls
into it,
are.
fell right over. You
You want to know what
know,
I've walked into so many of those posts too, like that
yes.
the concrete posts that protect the building in case a car runs into it. And I
And here
guess
I
that's what the
am.
Target things are too. But I've definitely
Oh,
walked into those plenty of times and hit my shin on,
yes.
truck hitches,
But nobody sees that
or
because,
fire or pipe sticking out the wall or,
yes.
things like that. Yeah. I've walked into those so many times. Yeah.
It's almost ironic though in some ways because somebody decided in hospitals that they were going to put your rights as a patient on the wall in Braille. Now, how many people do you know go like here to the hospital and say, gee, let me Braille your wall? Or when you go in the bathroom, same deal. I have to say, I have countered some really interesting toilets in my day. I didn't know whether to wave at them, to try to push them. I didn't know how to do some of these things. But these were all created by sighted people who were trying to help blind people. What are
Yeah.
you going to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I get it's like the intention's good, but I think it takes companies like or organizations like Lighthouse who kind
That's
of
right.
are employ blind people and
That's why
solely focus on it
I
to
think
really
it's really
pull it off.
important about like you. You are out there, telling people who are experiencing what you're experiencing, what I experienced, what the real deal is. But who are you going to ask unless there's somebody like you out there to explain to everybody how you adjust, how you feel,
Hmm.
what you do? Because I think that these topics are kind of very difficult to have with somebody who's sighted.
Well, they're not quick, they're not quick conversations. They're not elevator pitches, where it's like
No.
quickly summarize it for me in four sentences. Like
Mhm.
I think blindness is a spectrum. The phrase it kind of tries to do that, but
Yes.
then to truly explain blindness as a spectrum, you have to kind of write an essay about it or go into a
Oh, for
long
sure.
explainer.
That's
But
why I use
I
this.
kind of
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. No,
I
you
was
go
going to say,
ahead.
that's why I use this my tagline in my book that nobody hands you a manual how to cope the day they tell you
Yeah,
you're going blind. And
yeah.
that's how I pitched my story to many people because you're right, very right about that. How do you do that? easily if you don't
And you
know anybody.
also say there's no one size fits all either, which is true because everyone has different personalities.
Yeah.
Everyone has, even people with RP who have the same condition, or you have another eye condition, your vision, your field of vision is going to be different.
Right.
Your acuity is going to be different. And when you hit these levels, it's going to be different. So no one has the same vision as you do. So there's no one size fits all in terms of what people's vision looks like or how to adapt to it, because everyone's different in how they interpret things and accept things. Some people are more resilient than others. If you just want to be honest about it.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I kind of, and I'm sure you get this as a writer, someone who is writing about these topics. I do find it a fun challenge to try to explain it in a short, concise way, because it's not easy.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting.
I try though.
I agree with you. I do too. But I think that trying to tell people and expanding people's knowledge about blindness is a very powerful thing to do, because most people do not know that there's varying degrees of blindness. They usually think you're either see or lights out totally. There's no in between. I think that bringing awareness to talking about these difficult things like going blind, that's not an easy walk. And I think that that's where the power is, to just enlighten people. And right now, we are private citizens trying to enlighten people based on our journey. And I think that that's the most powerful thing that we can do.
Oh, for sure.
Because then people get some sort of it. The fear, I know people don't want to talk about blindness a lot of times because people tell me I'm so afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I was afraid, and I was immobile for 5 years due to fear. And what was that worth?
Yeah.
And that's what I tell people, are you going to hold yourself hostage? Because I know that fear. So I agree that that's one aspect of the blindness I think that people don't talk about, because they're afraid if they go blind, the whole concept, the whole idea is very frightening.
Yeah.
Because your life is not going to be the same. They know that.
Well, yeah. I find my audience, for the See-Through podcast is it's split between people with sight who are just curious about it because because it's scary to them, and it's also unique and fascinating to them, the idea of blindness and what it is and how people live with it because of that fear element. And then the other half is people, like who are either describing it, and to quote you, they're either going blind or living blind, but a lot of people will tune into these things or maybe read your book just out of curiosity based on the fear they have of blindness.
Right. Yeah. And it's not all bad. You can have fun, you can enjoy life, you can laugh, but maybe do things differently or do it a different way. But you can have all that. And I think that's where I was losing it, because when, they told me I was going blind, it just sounded like a journey to misery. Boy, what do you get out of it? What is a benefit of going blind? Well, there is one. If you really adjust and you really start relying more on your hearing as your primary sight than your eyes, magical things start to really happen. And one of them is that you listen more intently to people. So I get the real deal about people long before. People can't con you if you can't see the way they look. Sometimes somebody will look the part and you'll say, oh, this person looks like they got it going there. But words tell more. So as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the biggest blessings I ever got from losing my vision. I hear the real deal. Yeah.
So what you're saying is what you're saying is you can hear if people are being authentic.
Oh yeah.
You can kind of read into someone's personality and character based off of the sound of their voice.
Yes. And also like what they're saying to, because sometimes we don't really listen to what people are saying. We're more enthralled with how they look or
Yeah.
what we're interested in hearing from this person that seems like they have it all together. Where with me, with that eliminated out of the equation, I got the real deal better than when I had vision. Because I can hear when people are kind of lying, and I can hear when people are authentic. I can hear when a lot of different things, when people are hurting. I can hear when people are confident. You can hear all of that. And that's, I think, for me, more crystal clear than what I got with my vision. So
I believe you.
there you go. There's one positive that I found in it.
Well, let me ask you this, just out of curiosity. What do you take from my voice and how I talk and speak?
I think you're very authentic. That's why I listened to some of your podcasts because I really wanted to get a feel for you. And I said,
Okay.
this sounds like a really great opportunity. And so if I was listening to your podcast and you were sharing information and I was going blind, even blind, I would listen to you and believe you
Okay. That's good.
because I hear that realness in your voice.
Well, that's what that's why it's called the See-Through podcast, because it's transparent conversations. Sometimes people are afraid to have these conversations. They're so afraid to think about their eye condition or disability or whatever worries or problems they have going on in their life that they'd rather avoid it. And that sitting in these conversations and asking uncomfortable questions and thinking about, the worst case scenarios of things and analyzing, their situation. Sometimes they'd rather be in la la land than actually, kind of sit in that uncomfortableness. And that can kind of work for a while, but eventually you are going to hit that brick wall. And,
For sure.
and that's why I do this podcast. That's why, I try to cut through the noise and just try to get people to think, because,
Right.
I can't tell anyone what to do. I don't even try to, I want people to think for themselves, but I guess I hope to plant seeds to get people thinking, maybe a little bit differently or outside the box or,
Right.
that type of thing. And I'm assuming that's what your book Eclipse does as well. And we haven't really got too deep into your book yet. I want to hear about your book, and I know what we've talked about so far is covered in the book. I know a lot of different things are covered in your book, but let's talk about Eclipsed.
The book is set up with little vignettes, little stories in relation to times in my blindness. It's like a timetable. It starts out when I find out in college I'm going to go blind. Then I talk about the years where I was stuck for 5 years and did nothing, and what changed my mind to make me decide to jump on board with life again. I talk about funny things that have happened because in my journey, it wasn't all bad. And I think that is the one, like I said, the one assumption I had, and many people have, is that blindness is the most terrible thing that could ever happen to you. Blindness is bad. But blindness, when you learn that it and you don't allow it to define you, you can laugh, you can have fun, maybe not do everything exactly like you used to do it before. Maybe have to learn, for example, if you love to cook, use little press on dots that mark where where a cup mark is or a half a cup is, and they're available and learn how to do it that way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I am trying to show with my story is that I went through the whole thing. I lost sight, lived went to the lighthouse, lived without vision. Then all of a sudden got this opportunity to have this surgery over 10 years, a decade. I was blind. And like I say, I'm Rip Van Winkle. I came when the first time I went to a store and I wanted to get a coffee. It was smart machine, and the woman kept saying to me, "Just touch it." Well, I almost looked like I was making out with the machine because I'm touching the advertisement dots that kept popping up. I had no idea what a touch screen is, and when I was blind, I just would ask somebody. They'd see the cane, and they would do it for me. And
Hmm.
then I was here and I had no knowledge and I did not carry my cane at that time with me. So I looked kind of odd. And I remember I asked her, "How do you get the coffee?" And she goes, "Well, you do this." And she did it. And I said, "Well, how do you get the creamer?" And she did another machine and she said, "This is what you do." And then I went to the counter and I said, "How do you pay for this? What do I do with my credit card?" Because I always handed it to people because I couldn't see the slot or whatever was going on. And she took my card and she put it in the slot. And then she said, "Lady, it almost seems like you've never ever seen these things before." And I said to her, "What would you say if I told you I never have seen them before this month?" And she said, "You're so funny. Have a good day." And she gave me my receipt and off I went. So that was my first
Well, let's talk
time.
about that because I feel like let's get some context. I feel like so you had RP and then you had an eye infection and then you lost
Yes,
and then you went blind. You went blind,
that's right.
and then you were
Blind,
living
blind.
blind for a while, and then you
Yes,
had a surgery that gave you
yes.
back some vision.
An experimental surgery. I'm one of
Okay.
the first people in the world that ever had this happen. What very quickly is cool about this surgery is that because I do not have a groove to hold the lens in my eye, how they've hung it is with capillary hooks, little tiny hooks like a mirror on the wall.
Hmm.
And I'm one of the first people that ever had that surgery ever to
And it
occur.
worked.
And it worked. The only problem is that now we're over 12 years and I've have a lot of problems with the implant. It doesn't always let me see things like I used to. I can see you, but maybe not. You look like you're moving, or I just have a hard time seeing, like focusing in on the object.
Hmm.
But I look at it this way: I'm grateful every single day I can see, and I run that way.
Is it sharp?
And
Is
the
your
other thing,
vision acuity sharp, or is it blurry,
it
or?
well, it was very sharp when I first got the surgery.
Hmm.
I was like 20/40
Okay.
after they did the surgery. And
Hmm.
it's like looking out of a pipe. I still can't see anything out of the peripheries,
Yeah.
but the one eye I can see only out the center. I saw color, I saw everything.
All
And
right.
then as the implant started to have its moments, I don't always see all of that every day. But I don't ever get to the point where I see nothing. No. But it's just like clarity or maybe more detail. No, on certain days.
Yeah.
Now with the implant, the other thing is with the implant, I can't fly in a plane because the pressure.
Hmm.
So I can only travel on the train or drive with somebody.
Okay.
So that was the other thing with the implant. So right now, I don't see as great as I saw it years ago, a couple years ago, even 5 years ago. But I'm grateful I can see. And I take it, I've learned that when I went blind the first time, I thought I would never survive that. And I had a wonderful life. I was able to have a life, like have fun, have it all, even when I couldn't see. And so I look at it. I'm very grateful every day that I could see. I look every day at things to see what I haven't seen in a while, just so it can remind me in my mind
Mm-hmm.
of that appreciation for the moment. But if I went blind again, I'm not scared. Like, can I do this? I've done it before. Yes, I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't, throw a party. But on the flip side of it, I know that I could have a wonderful life. And so that is the one thing I'm grateful for, that I do not have that fear of, because I know I've done it before. And it's funny because even when I had my surgery, there's many things that I don't use lights because I was so used to doing them when I was blind. Like in my own home, at times at night, I don't turn on lights to get around. I just walk because I know the house and the flow and everything, which freaks out other people who don't expect me walking around in my house in the dark. But I have to say that I use that even though I have my vision.
Yeah. Okay. So you're kind of like a mix where you've kind of, I think this kind of goes to show about adapting. You saying that you wouldn't be that fearful of it if it happened again, if you lost your vision again, because you have all these years of experience of learning
Right.
how to live with blindness, that even so with vision coming back, you're still kind of operating, you're still kind of using certain methods that you were using when you were completely blind. So you're kind of like a hybrid of like you're acting as if you're blind, but you can still see a little bit, which is being legally blind. You're still considered legally blind even with the implant, right?
Right. That's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about. You said it's
And,
experimental. Um, can you talk about? Were you afraid to do something experimental? And then let's hear about the first moment you realized it worked. That had to be a
oh
interesting
my
moment.
gosh. Um, when I went to see the surgeon, I was worried, but as he pointed out to me, I had nothing to lose. I was blind. The groove was damaged, so there wasn't like a hope for somebody to put a lens in like a cataract surgery. So, and I asked him, I said, if I was a person in your family, would you recommend this for me? And he said, yes, I would, because you have nothing to lose. And I had the surgery, and I was scared because this was one of those all or nothing. It was either I was going to have vision when I got unbandaged because we didn't know. I hadn't seen anything in years and years out of one eye. So we didn't know what I was going to see. So I was nervous if I was going to see anything at all. And the whole thing was, he said, well, we're going to bandage you. And I said, yeah. And when will I find out if I can see? And he goes, 8 hours after the surgery. And I
Wow.
asked him, well, is it like in the movies where they show like the person looks and then they blink and it's fuzzy and it comes to you? He goes, no. The way it's going to happen is at that moment, whatever you see is what you're going to see. You're either, our goal is for you to get 20/20 with this lens, or he said, you could have the bandage removed and see nothing. So we won't know for 8 hours. We know that your eye responds, even though it has all this damage, the one eye does respond.
Hmm.
So we said, let's try. And I did. And my goodness, 8 hours unbandaged. The first thing I saw was an old bureau that I brought to Florida with me. I hadn't seen in years. And there it was. And I looked around at our house. Our home had been damaged by a hurricane.
Yeah.
So my husband had it rebuilt, but it was very different than the one I remembered when I had my vision. And I remember going out in the hall of this house and I couldn't believe I saw color. I saw furniture. I saw pictures. I saw trees. I couldn't believe it. It was there and it hadn't been there forever. And I remember I asked my husband, I said to him, "Where are we?" He says, "The house." And I said to him, "Whose house?" And he said, "Our house." And I said, "I live in this house?" He said, "Yeah, you do." And I just looked around. And when he had described after the rebuild, after the hurricane, what the house looked like, it was like nothing I had imagined.
Okay.
It was more, even better than I ever thought. The other thing that's funny is the first time I saw television, I freaked out because I had never seen, you got the smart TV. I mean, they show, I guess they show you so close that you can even see pores or whatever.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that when I lost my vision. So the first time they turned on TV, I jumped back. I said, "Are those mannequins, talking mannequins?" And my husband said, "No, those are people." I said, "They don't look real," because I hadn't seen color. I hadn't seen people in so long. The people on the TV did not look real to me. It really was very amazing to me.
Yeah.
But I was very appreciative. I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I cried. I cried. It was very overwhelming. Very, like the last time I remember I saw this tree in front of our house, and it was not even like a foot tall. Then I got my vision back, and the tree is like 5, 10 feet tall. And I'm like, "What tree is that?" He goes, "The tree that we planted." And I said, "Oh." Now, what is interesting is that I didn't look at what I look like. People ask me, "Oh, weren't you curious after all these years what you look like?" No, I was so happy to be able to see anything. I wasn't gonna, I knew that 12 years had passed. I wasn't gonna look like I looked 12 years. I remember my husband saying to me, "How do I look?" I said to him, he said, "You notice I gained weight." Well, I hug you, so there's no mystery there, okay?
Hmm.
Um, as far as the looking, and people would, that's the first question I'd be asked by people who knew me when I was blind. How do I look? And I say, "Great," because I was more appreciative of seeing for the first time after all those years what the other things were not as important to me. They were important to other people, how they looked to me after all those years, but it didn't matter to me. I finally stopped. I remember one time I was running around trying to look at different things, flowers and everything else. And I took a glance at myself and I said, "Oh, gee, wow, okay, that's cool." And off I went because it was amazing. 8 hours was the difference. Just 8 hours. And it wasn't like the movies. You blink and maybe you see and you don't. It's not clear. 8 hours told the story. It was clear. It was with color, just the way it was in the room.
Wow.
It amazed me. But dealing with smart devices, everybody was used to them. And, here I was, hugging soda machines because I couldn't figure out if they were where you're supposed to press, or, I was trying to figure it out, or maybe I had to do it faster. It was, it was interesting. I remember the first time I went with my sister and I went up north because there's plants. Plants are different up north and down here. We have orchids and whatnot down here. Up north, they at that time we went to somebody's garden and they had all these blooming flowers and plants, and They had lightning bugs where you could see the light on the bug. I hadn't seen that in forever. We don't have lightning bugs here. So I'd seen these. I was amazed. I wrote a poem that I was so overwhelmed by it all. Seriously. It just was. My sister at one time grabbed me by the arm and said, "You look strange," because I was like touching, like almost petting the flowers because I couldn't believe they were real.
Wow.
It was just a lot.
That's so interesting. I mean, not very hardly anyone on planet Earth has got to experience that, you know. So that's such a unique experience to you to have, you know, sight go away and then come back, you know. And it almost does sound surreal that, you know, when you didn't think.
It's Rip Van Winkle, the
Yeah,
modern Rip Van Winkle. I mean, this was, and you know, when I got my operation, they didn't think about the ramifications of not seeing and then all of a sudden seeing. They
yeah,
thought, my doctor thought, I was just going to pick off where I left off. Just pick up.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
good. Bye. I got no counseling. I did not what I saw and what I had to deal with. I had no idea what was coming, honestly.
wow,
So that's what I have to say was the big, like, oh my God, I didn't even know. It was like a runaway train, you know? Somebody's saying to you, hit, touch it's a touch screen. What is a touch screen? Or like when somebody said to me, you have to swipe. And I said, what? Swipe? What does that mean? Because the only swipe I knew was when somebody stole something from you, they swiped it.
yeah.
I said, I don't know anything about swipe. And I want to tell you, when I got my first smartphone, I had to practice swiping. I was like a child. I couldn't figure out how to even do it because I kept trying to like press a button, like in the old days where you just press the button and it happens. That wasn't what it was about. So I was so behind the learning curve that it was kind of funny. It really was funny
Wow.
because everybody else knew what to do except me.
What year was this? What year was it that you had this surgery?
What was the year? 2012,
2012. Yeah.
January.
What year were you basically considered blind? Like where you're not being.
98, 99.
Yeah, because
1999 was when I couldn't see anything and I went to the lighthouse.
yeah, it's interesting because that is such a pivotal time for technology. The amount of changes between 1999 and 2012. You know, standard definition TVs to HD to
Yeah.
4K.
Yeah.
Everything's touchscreen. You know, smartphones. Everything. In terms of human history. I mean, that's probably the biggest leap in a decade of technology. So what a time to. what a. It's just, you know, you talk about it being kind of comically funny. That decade. It was such a critical decade of technology to not.
Sure.
So I imagine seeing after that decade of I could imagine all the confusion for certain tech changes and things like that. I just find that so unique. And you know, you mentioned something that a lot of people were interested in. They're interested in how they looked. And you mentioned that you weren't interested in how you looked. Do you think, you know, vision, you know, it's obviously a beautiful thing when you can see a sunset and you can, you know, see people's faces and things and, you know, but is there like a vanity side to vision that kind of people don't understand, that maybe the gift of sight can kind of negatively influence you to be more vain and more sight-based and because, you know, it seems like the two different things. Like, do you feel like, you know, vision loss affected you in that way, or do you have any insight on that? Like, you know,
I think that people who are sighted and who use, even when I had vision, I wanted to know how I looked. I didn't want to have my hair look strange or whatever. When I met people at the lighthouse, nobody had a bad hair day. Nobody. canceled on you because they felt like they didn't have the right clothes or the right whatever. That wasn't about that. It was very freeing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Very freeing. I find that more people will concentrate on how they look first, not how they feel, what their intention is to do, what they're doing. They don't think about that because they're too busy seeing what the visual is. And I think that that was one thing I am grateful for. That when I lost that, I got the real deal about life. I went to events. I went to one event and I had this habit of buying the same shoe type. And I bought two pairs. One was brown and one was blue or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I wore one brown shoe and I wore one blue shoe, went to an event. Nobody told me I had two different colors on. I didn't feel because it was the same shoe type.
Yeah.
And you know what? I could have said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did this." But you know what? I laughed. What can you say about that? That's kind of funny. If
Yeah.
all these people are looking at you with two, and I kept thinking to myself, well, did they think I'm making a fashion statement? But I think that that was the other thing. I didn't, I learned not to take myself so seriously. So I didn't have to concentrate on things that I couldn't concentrate on and be uncomfortable, not be able to do and have a great life because I was too wrapped around what I look like. Is the dress the right color? Is this right? Is that right? I find in my travels, in my journey, that people care what you say to them or tell them more than what your hair looked like and, and what you were wearing. I've met people, later, a lot later than when I first met them, who remember me because they'll say, "Oh, I remember when you told me you gave me this advice about going blind, or you told me you shared with me this about going blind."
Yeah.
I don't remember any one person who said to me, "Oh yeah, I remember you. You were the lady that wore that red outfit that didn't look good on you." I think that you have to give yourself a little more latitude, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
I think
No.
sometimes we look at ourselves a little more critically in
Yeah.
relation to that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of silliness and wasted. There's a lot of time wasted spent on the visual aesthetics of something. It's nice. Sometimes things are visually appealing. Like a certain
Right,
outfit. You feel can help
right,
your confidence or hairstyle but at the end of the day, it's not a do or die. Like your hairstyle
no,
isn't do or die. Your clothes isn't do or die.
no,
And at the end of the day, you're right. Most people aren't going to be like, I remember. They're going to remember how you made them feel. That's a kind of a
feel,
common thing where it's like, they're not going to remember. People might not remember what you were wearing, or maybe
right,
even what you said, but they're going to remember how you made them feel.
for sure.
And yeah, but I think people put too much emphasis on like, oh, I have to have this outfit, I have to have this name
Yeah.
brand, I have to have this type of this, and
Oh, for
and
sure.
and at the end of the day, a blind person's interpretation of it kind of is proof of how unimportant it is because it's not
Yeah,
registered at all to someone who is blind. And,
this is,
and to build a relationship or to build a connection, you don't need to see what someone looks like. You don't need to know what clothes they're wearing.
I
It
think
can
it's
be
very
done through
freeing.
voice.
Not for sure. It's
Yeah.
very freeing. I have to say, it is very freeing
Yeah.
because you really understand what people are, even with people, what their intention is and what they're doing with
Yeah.
their talents. You kind of get a feel for people that you want to connect with and people you don't. And it's a lot clearer when your visual doesn't obscure the reality.
Yeah.
For real.
I agree. So to wrap this interview up, I want to give you an opportunity to tell everyone where they can find your book, Eclipsed. Where can people find it?
You can find me on Amazon. I have a website, Elizabeth Pizzarello. You can find me. I'm on Linktree. You can find everything about me on Linktree. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. So that's where you can find me.
Great. And to make it easy for everyone, I'll have a link in the episode description, for Beth's, Linktree, and a link to where you can buy her book. And I recommend reaching out to her. She'll want to hear from you, and she would love it if you would take the time and consider giving her book a read. We covered a lot. I'm like, I think I can safely say that we could talk much longer. I think you like to talk. I can say that. Your book has to be jam packed with these thoughtful insights like you shared with me in this episode. And even in our hour and a half conversation, I think you planted a lot of seeds in terms of how I'm going to think about things and move forward with my vision loss journey. So I imagine that's the goal of your book, is to help people who are in that going blind or living blind scenario, and super, super interesting to have your vision loss journey of, not knowing you have an eye condition, to being diagnosed with one, to having a viral infection, to losing your vision, to getting a surgery and having it come back. And then all that comes with that, and what you learned along the way is a story that is no one else could tell. No one else could tell that story. So it's incredible, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing it with me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope we meet again.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely stay in touch, and I can't wait for everyone to hear this episode. And again, thanks for coming on.
Wonderful.